Now, what was the genesis of this conference? I think I have become a very constant visitor to Bhubaneswar and Cuttack, not the least of the reasons for which is that I'm proudly regarded as the son-in-law of Orissa because my wife is an Oriya. Chief Justice Muralidhar, my very distinguished colleague Justice Rajesh Bindal, Chief Justice Vipin Sanghi, many of the Chief Justices who have joined online and we can see them on the screen, Justice Satish Sharma, Justice Sanjay Gangapurwala. I'm told by Chief Justice Muralidhar that so many others have also joined online, but we can't, the videos possibly are not on, so we can't see all of you, but I'm sure I'll interact with you later. Judges of the High Court, the Secretary Department of Justice, Shri Rahate, Mr. Prasun Pandey, Mr. Ashok Kumar from the Department of Justice, district judges, CPCs, E-committee members who have traveled all the way from Delhi to be here. Mr. Ashish Radhonkar is here, Shalina is here, Arul Mori is here, Parvinder is here, the Learned Advocate General of Orissa, senior officers of the state, and ladies and gentlemen. Before I get into the more serious and even boring parts of my presentation, I must tell you that I was intrigued by this very distinct American twang in the neutral citations commentary. When Chief Justice Muralidhar whispered in my ear that that's the product of artificial intelligence. This is not a human agency, not an Indian trying to put on an accent. So I'm sure that you know the genesis of that. But it tells you what the enormous potential of technology is today. I have a few slides this morning to make my presentation. I thought of making a few slides because there's a great danger and tendency that when the Chief Justice of India speaks to the family of judges, you tend to meander into so many issues which are present in my mind and which I work every single day of my working day as a Chief Justice. There's a grave danger that I might break into issues which are of concern to me and not strictly relevant to this conference. So I thought I'll keep my own focus, so to speak, by having a few slides. And I've divided my slides into three areas. The first is the vision of phase 3. The second is the major activities which we want to envisage. And third, the roadmap. Now, what was the genesis of this conference? I think I have become a very constant visitor to Bhubaneswar and Cuttack, not the least of the reasons for which is that I'm proudly regarded as the son-in-law of Orissa because my wife is an Oriya. But quite apart from that, I think the reason for my coming here so repeatedly is this dynamic engagement of Chief Justice Muralidhar with technology and the E-Courts project in our common mission to ensure that access to justice devolves to common citizens. So our purpose in pitchforking technology, and I believe I've pitchforked it as a central point of my mission as Chief Justice of India, is not to use technology to place it at some silo away from our citizens, but to ensure that we use technology to reach out to common citizens across the country. But the genesis of this conference was in my earlier visits to this beautiful state. And I was struck by the initiatives which have been taken by Chief Justice Muralidhar, whether it was in terms of the RRDC, which I had the pleasure of being associated with, or whether it was in terms of opening up virtual courts in all the districts in Orissa. Now I'm told by the Learned Chief Justice that as many as 20 districts have virtual courts where lawyers can address the High Court sitting in their own districts. So technology has really obliterated in that sense the need for benches of the High Courts. Because you have a bench of the High Court in as many districts as you have set up virtual courts. And look at the enormous impact which this has. I say, speaking of my own court, that the Supreme Court of India is not the Supreme Court of Tilak Marg, but it's the Supreme Court for India, of India, by India. Likewise, each High Court is not really a High Court for the metropolitan capital of that state. Setting up these virtual courts across districts has enabled the Odisha High Court to truly be representative of the entire state, to ensure that there is access to justice for citizens across the state who want access to the High Court. Some of the finest lawyers are not necessarily lawyers who are confined to the capital cities of the states. Many of them don't move to the capital cities for lack of resources, for family reasons, for a variety of reasons that they are confined to their own districts. But why should they not have access to presenting their cases before the High Court? My experience in the Supreme Court is that when we have lawyers from across India now presenting arguments, both during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond, the only thing that they may lack perhaps is the swagger or the verve of people who regularly approach us in the Supreme Court. But they certainly have confidence, they have knowledge, and they have that close connect with their own litigants, their clients, who trust them. So the genesis of this conference began when I visited RRDC and I spoke to my good friend Murli, and I requested Murli, I said, was it not time for us to ensure that we unveil what you have done in terms of digitization for high courts across the country so that they can share our best practices? And that's how this conference came into being. Now, the vision of the e-courts project is to provide affordable, accessible, cost-effective, environmentally sustainable, transparent, and an accountable justice delivery system. Each of these phrases is not just a phrase of art or a label, but it signifies the core of our mission of reaching out to citizens, of replacing what was the earlier colonial model of the administration of justice, under which citizens had to reach out to courts. We seek to now replace it with a model where we reach out to citizens and allow us to provide every kind of resource and service to our citizens. Now, if you look at the outlay for phase 3 of the e-courts project, which is going to be between 2023 to 2027, the total outlay which we have envisaged is 7,210 crores. Of it, the outlay for 2023-24 is 2,024 crores, or nearly 2,025. 2024-25, 2,109.6. 2025-26, 1,523 crores. And 2026-27, 1,552 crores. Compare it with the outlays in phase 1 and phase 2. The outlay for phase 1 and phase 2 combined was a fraction of the outlay for phase 3. And perhaps phase 1 and phase 2 was no more than the outlay for the first year of the e-courts project in phase 3. So we can now look at the enormity of the funds which the government of India is providing to us. I must share with all of you, all our sisters and brothers, particularly who are here from the high courts, that when we pitched for this budget, the union government responded, the Ministry of Finance, and we were ably assisted by the Department of Justice, responded by not even making a cut of a single rupee in the funds which we envisaged. Because the importance of this was that we presented it properly. We were able to explain to the financial arms of the government on what the benefits would be in terms of this outlay which we propose for the Indian judiciary. Initially, during our meetings with the Ministry of Finance last year, the view was expressed that let this be a centrally sponsored scheme in which the center and the states would bear their own shares. But our experience in the past has not been uniform across the country. During the course of the 14th Finance Commission, there was a devolution, the increased devolution from 32 to 42%. But the experience which was gained in the course of the 14th Finance Commission, and this was noted in the report of the 15th Finance Commission, is that despite the increased devolution, the states were not willing to share funds with their judiciaries. And there was no way that the high courts could tap these funds. So both the Department of Justice and the E-Committee of the Supreme Court impressed upon the Ministry of Finance that if this project is truly to achieve its mission, and particularly having regard to the fact that phase 1 and phase 2 were 100% funded by the union government, the same principle should be followed for phase 3. And that is how it is going to be. 100% is going to be provided by the union government. During the course of a meeting which I held with the Department of Justice just a few days ago, and I'm sure both Mr. Rahate as well as Mr. Prasun Pandey and Mr. Ashok Kumar would be sharing these details with you. There are two options which the Department of Justice and the Expenditure Finance Committee has created. The first option, which is Model 1, is the default option. The default option envisages that the entirety of the funds would of course be provided by the union government and channelized through the E-Committee. But at the same time, this would cover the specifications which we lay down for the entirety of the country. The second, which is Model 2, which is very innovative and which is something which I'm sure all of the judges here who are chairpersons of the ICT committee and the Chief Justices would like to devote themselves after it is explained in greater detail by the representatives of the Department of Justice. Model 2 envisages something which I have been hearing from our colleagues across India. Model 2 envisages that if a state wants to go in for higher specifications, a state, for instance, feels that I don't want to be constricted by the minimum standards or the threshold standards which have been laid down as part of the e-courts project, but my budgetary outlays are going to be higher and my state government is willing to provide that. Chief Justice Muralidhar has always mentioned to me, for instance, that the state of Orissa has been extremely forthcoming on the needs of the Orissa judiciary in terms of ICT initiatives. The state of Kerala has also been at the forefront. I know, as a matter of fact, that the state of Madhya Pradesh has been extremely hospitable to the demands of the judiciary. Several other states have been. Other states which are not named are woefully behind the tangent. So if there are states and if there are high courts which are able to get higher commitment of funds, then Model 2 envisages that you can increase your specifications, you can set higher targets. In fact, I have constituted an advisory committee consisting of Justice Rajiv Shakdar, Justice Suraj Govindraj, Justice Raja Vijay Raghavan, and Justice Anup Chitkara. Part of it was selfish because as Chief Justice of India, I can devote only so much time now for the E-Committee, but I don't want to cede control over this mission of mine. But the committee has been constantly telling me that their high courts have done much better work than what has been envisaged by the E-Committee. At a certain level, we require national uniformity. At the same time, national uniformity does not account for the fact that there are high courts which are far ahead of the curve. So Model 2 will really, in that sense, take into account these concerns of the high courts, that let the e-courts project not be a constraining influence on our activities, but a source for providing a minimum standard for the entirety of the nation, a uniformity, which, while providing for the basic needs of states, especially the cash-strapped high courts and their district judiciaries, do not operate as a sort of a constraining influence. Now, what are the major activities of Phase 3? The first, and that I want to emphasize, is the creation of digital infrastructure. Digitization is envisaged, the budget is close to 2,038 crores. Technological advancements, cloud infrastructure, Cloud storage has a budget of 1,205 crores. Digital preservation, access to critical services that I'm going to be speaking of very shortly, and change management. Among other activities, you have software development, which is about 243 crores. Now, there are 24 major components in phase 3 of the eCourts project. Out of these 24 components, the Department of Justice and the E-Committee have tentatively, I say tentatively because it's subject to discussion with all our high courts, identified 13 components where there may be a need for centralization. And why centralization? The reason for centralization, for instance, is that in the area of digitization and scanning, the Expenditure Finance Committee, while releasing the 7,200 crores to us, has made certain binding recommendations. Among those binding recommendations is that scanning and digitization must be subject to open price market discovery. We envisage that about 3,108 crore documents would be digitized at a certain per page estimation. The Expenditure Finance Committee has highlighted that perhaps